She was not born into royalty. She did not have an army behind her, and no one was looking for her. Yet the fate of an entire nation would one day rest on her silence and her courage. Her name was Esther. Long before crowns and royal robes, Esther was an orphan, raised by her cousin Mordecai in a foreign empire where her people lived in exile. She learned early that survival sometimes meant staying hidden, blending in, and saying less than you knew. What she didn't know was this: while she lived her quiet life, a throne was about to be emptied.
The story begins not with Esther, but with power. King Xerxes, also known as Ahasuerus, ruled the vast Persian Empire, stretching from India to Ethiopia. He was wealthy beyond imagination, commanding armies that darkened the horizon and riches that dazzled the world. To display the greatness of his kingdom, the king hosted a lavish banquet in the royal citadel of Susa. This was no ordinary feast. For 180 days, nobles, military commanders, princes, and officials were entertained with a grand exhibition of Persia's glory. Golden goblets, flowing wine, marble pillars, and fine linen draped in white and blue. When those 6 months ended, the king was still not satisfied. So he hosted another feast, this time for 7 days, open to everyone in Susa, from the greatest to the least. Wine flowed freely, the palace shimmered with excess. Meanwhile, Queen Vashti, the king's wife, hosted a separate banquet for the women of the palace. On the 7th day, when King Xerxes was merry with wine, he sent for Queen Vashti. He wanted her brought before the men, crowned in her royal splendor, to display her beauty. But Queen Vashti refused. Her refusal sent shockwaves through the palace. No one said no to the king, ever. Furious and humiliated, Xerxes consulted his advisors. They warned him that Vashti's defiance would inspire rebellion among women across the empire. So a decree was issued. Queen Vashti was stripped of her title and banished from the king's presence forever. Just like that, the queen's throne was empty.
Far from the palace halls, among the Jewish exiles living in Persia, lived a young woman named Hadassah, known by her Persian name, Esther. She was an orphan, raised by her older cousin Mordecai, a man of integrity and quiet strength. Mordecai had taught Esther her faith, her identity, and her values, but he also taught her caution. The Jews were a minority in Persia. They lived under foreign rule. Survival often meant blending in. Esther was beautiful, remarkably so, but beauty alone had never been her ambition. Yet destiny was already moving.
After these events, when the anger of King Ahasuerus had subsided, the king began to remember Queen Vashti, her beauty, her refusal, and the decree that had been made against her. The palace grew quiet again, but the throne remained without a queen. Seeing the king's spirit troubled, his servants spoke among themselves and brought a proposal before him. They suggested that a great search be conducted throughout the vast provinces of the empire. Young women, beautiful and worthy, would be gathered from every region and brought into the royal city of Susa. There, they would be placed under the care of the king's officials and prepared for presentation before the king. And from among them, one would be chosen to take Vashti's place and become queen. The plan pleased the king, and the command was issued. messengers rode swiftly throughout the empire, carrying the royal order to distant lands and cities. From villages and towns, from noble houses and humble homes, young women were taken and brought to the palace, each unaware of what her future might hold.
Women were taken, yes, taken from their homes and brought to the palace harem. Among them was Esther. Mordecai walked with her as far as he could, giving her one final instruction: do not reveal your people or your family. Esther obeyed. In the palace, she found favor with Haggai, the eunuch in charge of the women. She received special treatment, beauty preparations, and the best place in the harem. For 12 months the women were prepared, 6 months with oil of myrrh, 6 months with perfumes and cosmetics. When Esther's turn came to meet the king, she asked for nothing except what Haggai recommended. And when King Xerxes saw her, he was captivated. Out of all the women, Esther won his favor. And before the watching court, the king loved Esther more than all the other women. That very moment, the royal crown was brought forth. Gold caught the light. Silence filled the hall. And Esther, once an orphan, now stood before the throne, chosen, crowned, and made queen.
Around that same time, while Esther was still newly crowned, Mordecai took his place at the king's gate, a place where royal business was conducted and palace officials frequently passed by. Day after day he remained there quietly, watchful and observant. It was there, among the movement of guards and servants, that Mordecai overheard a dangerous conversation. 2 of the king's officers, entrusted with guarding the palace doors, spoke in low voices, believing no one was listening. Their words were filled with bitterness and resentment. Hidden behind duty was betrayal, and concealed beneath loyalty was murder. They were plotting to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. Mordecai listened carefully. He did not interrupt. He did not reveal himself. When he was certain of what he had heard, he acted swiftly. He sent word to Queen Esther. Esther received the message with urgency and restraint. Though she now wore a crown, she did not forget who had raised her. Without delay, she went before the king and revealed the plot, naming Mordecai as the source of the warning. An investigation was ordered. The officers were questioned. Their guilt was confirmed. Justice followed. The men were put to death, and the entire matter was recorded in the official royal chronicles, preserved before the king, unnoticed at the time, but not forgotten. King Ahasuerus elevated a man named Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite. The promotion was sudden, unmistakable, and absolute. Above governors, above princes, above every noble in the land, Haman was placed second only to the king himself. Authority followed him wherever he went. By royal decree, all who served within the palace gates were commanded to bow before Haman. It was no longer a matter of respect, it was law. As Haman passed, knees bent, heads lowered, faces pressed toward the stone floor. The sound of obedience echoed through the king's gate. Day after day, this ritual repeated itself. Yet among the sea of bowed figures, one man remained standing. Mordecai did not shout his refusal. He did not argue. He simply stood, still, upright, and unmoved, while the crowd fell low around him. His silence was louder than rebellion. The servants noticed. At first, they spoke to him quietly, urging him to comply. They feared what disobedience could bring, not only upon Mordecai, but upon themselves. "Why do you refuse to bow?" they asked him again and again. But Mordecai would not yield. Finally, he told them the truth. He was a Jew. When word reached Haman, it pierced deeper than insult. This was not mere defiance. It was identity, faith, conviction. And to Haman, it was humiliation. His pride shattered into fury. But Haman's rage did not stop with one man. To punish Mordecai alone would not satisfy him. Instead, his hatred expanded, cold, calculated, and merciless. He resolved not only to destroy Mordecai, but to erase his people entirely. Men and women, young and old, in every province, in every city. What began as wounded pride became a plan for annihilation. And the fate of an entire people now hung on one man's refusal to bow. So Haman came before King Xerxes. He bowed low, his voice smooth, respectful, carefully measured.
There is a certain people scattered and dispersed among the provinces of your empire. Their laws are different from those of every other people, and they do not obey the king's laws.
He paused, letting suspicion take root. It is not in the king's best interest, Haman continued softly, to tolerate them. He did not name the Jews. He did not speak of Esther. He cloaked hatred in politics, genocide in the language of loyalty. Then he made his offer.
If it pleases the king, let a decree be issued to destroy them, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the royal treasury.
Silver for blood. The king listened. Perhaps he was distracted. Perhaps he trusted Haman too much. Or perhaps he never imagined that such evil could hide behind such calm words. Without hesitation, King Xerxes removed his signet ring, the symbol of absolute authority, and handed it to Haman. "The silver is yours," the king said, "and the people as well. Do with them as you please." Haman left the king's presence, triumphant. A decree was written, stamped, and sealed with the king's ring. It named a specific day, a day chosen by lot, when every Jew, young and old, women and children, would be destroyed, killed, and annihilated.
Your support means the world to us. Like, share, and subscribe.
Messengers mounted swift horses and rode in every direction. Scrolls were delivered to every province, every city, every governor. And when the decree reached Susa, confusion spread like wildfire. People stood frozen in the streets, rereading the words. Whispers turned into cries. Fear filled the air. But in the palace, the king and Haman sat down to drink, untroubled, untouched, unmoved. When Mordecai learned what had been written, his grief was immediate and public. He tore his garments, clothed himself in sackcloth, and covered his head with ashes. He cried out loudly and bitterly as he walked through the city. He did not hide his sorrow. At the king's gate, where he was forbidden to enter dressed in mourning, he stopped and wept. Across the empire, the Jewish people responded the same way. Wherever the decree arrived, there was mourning. Fasting replaced feasting. Weeping echoed through homes. Lamentation rose from every province. This was not fear alone. It was the sound of a people facing extinction. Inside the palace walls, Esther remained unaware, shielded by distance and luxury. When word finally reached her that Mordecai stood outside the gate in sackcloth and ashes, she was deeply distressed. She sent garments for him to wear, hoping to remove his mourning, but Mordecai refused them. So Esther sent Hatak, one of the king's trusted attendants, to learn what had happened and why.
Hatak returned with the full weight of the truth. Mordecai explained everything: Haman's plan, the money promised to the treasury, and the decree calling for the destruction of the Jews. He even sent a copy of the written order.
Then Mordecai gave Esther a charge that would change everything. She must go to the king. She must plead for her people. She must risk her life. Esther listened, and fear took hold. She reminded Mordecai of the law known to all. Anyone who approached the king without being summoned could be put to death, unless the king extended his golden scepter. And she had not been called for 30 days. For the first time, the crown on her head felt heavy.
Do not think you will escape, because you are in the palace. Who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this?
Esther did not answer immediately. She withdrew into silence, the weight of the crown pressing heavier than ever before. Fear wrestled with faith. Survival wrestled with purpose. And in that quiet struggle, a decision was
Gather all the
formed.
Jews who are in Susa. Tell them to fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. Then I will go to the king, though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish.
All the Jews, men, women, and children, fasted for 3 days and 3 nights. On the 3rd day, Esther rose. She bathed, dressed, and clothed herself, not merely in royal garments, but in courage. Step by measured step, she walked into the inner court of the palace, uninvited, unseen, and entirely vulnerable. Death was the law. Silence hung in the air. The king sat upon his throne, facing the entrance, and when he lifted his eyes and saw Queen Esther standing there, something changed. Favor replaced formality. Mercy overcame law. The king extended his golden scepter toward her. Esther stepped forward and touched its tip, and she lived.
What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? It shall be given to you, even to half of the kingdom.
If it pleases the king, let the king and Haman come today to the banquet I have prepared.
The king agreed, and at the banquet he asked again what her request was. Esther invited them to another banquet the next day, saying she would answer then. Haman left the banquet in high spirits, but when he saw Mordecai at the gate, still refusing to bow, his happiness vanished. At home, he boasted to his wife and friends about his wealth and honors, but complained bitterly about Mordecai. His wife suggested he build a gallows 75 feet high and ask the king's permission to hang Mordecai on it in the morning. Delighted, Haman had the gallows built. That night, the king couldn't sleep. He ordered the book of Chronicles to be read to him, and the reader came to the account of how Mordecai had exposed the assassination plot. "What honor has been given to Mordecai for this?" the king asked. "Nothing has been done for him," his attendants replied. Just then, Haman entered the court to speak to the king about hanging Mordecai. The king called him in and asked what should be done for the man the king delights to honor. Thinking the king meant him, Haman described an elaborate honor. The man should wear royal robes and ride the king's horse through the city while a noble proclaims his honor. "Excellent," said the king. "Go at once, take the robes and horse, and do this for Mordecai the Jew." Haman was horrified, but had no choice. He led Mordecai through the city, proclaiming his honor. Afterward, he rushed home in mourning.
His wife warned him.
Mordecai is Jewish. You cannot stand against him. You will surely come to ruin.
The king and Haman returned once more to the banquet Esther had prepared. The hall glowed with golden light. Soft music filled the air, and servants moved quietly. Everything appeared peaceful on the surface, yet beneath it, a turning point was unfolding. King Ahasuerus reclined at the table, his eyes resting on Esther. For the third time he asked,
What is your request, Queen Esther? It shall be granted to you. What is your petition? Even to half of my kingdom it shall be performed.
If I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given me at my petition, and my people at my request. For we are sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be slain, and to perish.
"Who would dare do such a thing?" King Xerxes demanded. Esther pointed.
The adversary and enemy is this vile Haman.
The king's anger burned, his eyes fixed on Haman, who crouched near the throne in terror, realizing that the plot he had devised against Esther's people had been revealed. The king arose in his wrath from the banquet of wine and went into the palace garden. But Haman stayed to beg Queen Esther for his life, for he saw that the king had decided his destruction. As the king returned from the palace garden to the banquet hall, Haman had fallen on the couch where Esther was reclining. Then the king said, "Will he also molest the queen in my presence, in my own house?" Immediately the king commanded the guards to seize Haman, and they hanged him on the gallows that Haman had prepared for Mordecai. Thus Haman perished. But the crisis wasn't over. The decree to destroy the Jews was still in effect, and according to Persian law, no decree sealed with the king's signet ring could be revoked. So King Xerxes gave Esther and Mordecai permission to write another decree allowing the Jews to defend themselves. On the 13th day of the 12th month, when the enemies of the Jews had hoped to overpower them, the opposite occurred. The Jews assembled in their cities throughout the provinces and struck down those who sought their destruction. No one could stand against them, because fear of them had seized all peoples. On that day, the Jews in Susa killed 500 men, including Haman's 10 sons. The king asked Esther what more she wanted. She requested one more day for the Jews in Susa to defend themselves, and that Haman's sons be hanged on the gallows. The king granted her request. Throughout the empire, 75,000 enemies were killed, but the Jews did not lay their hands on the plunder. They fought only in self-defense. The 14th day of the month became a day of feasting and joy. Mordecai recorded these events and sent letters to all the Jews, establishing the days as the festival of Purim, to be observed annually as days of feasting and joy, and giving presents to one another and gifts to the poor. King Xerxes elevated Mordecai to second in command in the kingdom. Mordecai was preeminent among the Jews and held in high esteem because he worked for the good of his people and spoke up for the welfare of all Jews. The lessons from Esther's story resonate across the centuries. Sometimes God places us in positions not for our own comfort, but to serve His purposes. Esther could have remained silent, protected by her position and hidden identity. Instead, she risked everything because she recognized the moment she was made for. We learned that courage doesn't mean the absence of fear. Esther was terrified when she approached the king uninvited. Courage means doing what's right despite the fear. We learned that our identity matters. Esther ultimately had to reveal who she was to fulfill her purpose. We learn that God works through ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances. This is the story of Esther, orphan, queen, and hero. A woman who discovered that she was exactly where she needed to be, at exactly the right time, for exactly the right purpose. And in her courage, an entire nation found salvation.
If Esther could risk her life for her people, surely you can risk one click. Like, share, and subscribe before I call the king.